no matter what changes there are made to the offense for Michigan football, considering there's Bryce Underwood, there's Chip Lindsey, there's one thing that is not going to change as long as Sharon Moore is the head coach of the program, and that is they will smash. Now, last year, maybe the offensive line wasn't up to what anyone had expectations, but things certainly will hopefully change for Michigan. Let's talk about the offensive line on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. If you're watching on video, yeah, still the slick back hair and no Jesus is King hat. The Jesus King hat's coming back. Again, we're just playing around with the fact that I'm enjoying this hairstyle. Nonetheless, enough about me. That's ridiculous. No one wants to hear that, except for like the three people that my mom, my grandma, my Aunt Dee Dee. Are you the three? Those are the three that are like, oh, that's very nice. Anyway, let's talk about Michigan's offensive line. We're just staying on offense because there's just, as much as I keep on thinking about previewing linebackers, that feels like a segment almost. And defensive backs will be one whole thing. So let's just go with a position group that I have a little bit more to talk about, and that's going to be the offensive line. So there are a few players returning. Greg Crippen is returning at center. Certainly, they tried to look at other options. Hence, Pat Coogan was a target, right? But Greg Crippen returns at center. Right guard Giovanni El-Hadi's returning. Right tackle. For most games, Evan Link is returning, maybe to some people's chagrin. He played left tackle in the ReliaQuest Bowl. You have Andrew Sprague, who played right tackle in that bowl game as well, coming back. So really the losses are not Giovanni El-Hadi, we already said that. Dominic Giudice, like Dom Giudice and Giovanni. That just feels like two Italian first names. But Dom Giudice, who started the season at center, he transferred to Mizzou. Josh Preeb is out of eligibility. Miles Hinton goes to the NFL. So things are looking relatively thin when it comes to the offensive line to some degree. But you do still have four guys with starting experience this past year coming in this year. So that's good news, right? Like, you still have those guys. Now, you can say that the experience wasn't necessarily amazing. Crippen was a little bit of a mixed bag, but got better as the year went along. Giovanni El-Hadi seemed to kind of regress from when he came in 2022 to spell now Super Bowl champion along with national champion Trevor Keegan. Only one to have won them both in just the one just over a year's time in this past cycle, right? I guess you could look at the other way, but anyway, I need to not get into my little ADHD mind games here and just stay focused. All right, so there's at least a little bit of backsliding that we saw from Giovanni El-Hadi, but you get better at football by playing football. This is the first time that he obviously it was different when he was in 2022 playing next to Olu, between Olu and who was the left tackle in 2022? I don't even remember right this second. I know a bunch of y'all are screaming as I say this, but my memory isn't always great. I can remember things that happened forever ago. Things that happened 2 years ago. 5 minutes ago. I don't know. Nonetheless, you hope that both Crippen and El-Hadi get better, and certainly you hope that Link gets better. Now, Link had his moments. Early in the season, he was abysmal. Like, you could look at pretty much any play, run, or pass and try to figure out why did that not work a lot of the times, because if like the quarterback was being flushed, whether it was Davis Warren or Alex Orji, or the run, like the run fit didn't happen. Almost always it felt like, I'm not trying to pile on too much here with Evan Link, it felt like I'd watch the replay in real time on the Michigan Stadium screen or in the road venue, and it just seemed like, well, that's because Evan Link missed his block. But he got better, and certainly there were moments. Even in the USC game, that big run for Kalel Mullings, if memory serves, Evan Link had that final block that kind of helped him spring him. So he did get better and had his moments. And by the year's end, certainly he was decent, right? Like he held his own against the tandem of JT Tumalau and Jack Sawyer. And I know Michigan fans have their opinions of them, but still, like, other teams weren't able to hold them at bay as much as Michigan was. So that was, we've seen some progress from him. And then lots of promising action from Andrew Sprague, who certainly got a lot of discussion throughout the later end of the season, later half of the season, as a guy who could step in at any point. So if you have those four, then you know that you just got to plug in another starter and kind of go from there. Now, they do have bodies, right? There are certainly different guys that you could look at and say, who could be that other guard spot if that's the case? You could look at the transfer Lawrence Hattar, who I have currently slotted in. You look at, Brady Norton, who comes from Cal Poly, feels like that one's going to take a little bit of time before he's, ready. I mean, but that could be the same for Hattar, even though he's got all this experience at Ferris State, right? Like this is last year of eligibility, barring some kind of red shirt, I believe. But you got those guys. You could move Link inside and look at a guy like Nathan Efobi, who's entering year 3, and say, could it be his time? But with the losses that they had, and then you have the transfers, because certainly you'd be looking at Andrew Gentry as a likely guy that would be slotted in, right? Like, he's been talked about a ton, but yet he ends up having to kind of wait his turn, doesn't end up starting to begin the season because of Evan Link, and then finds himself in a situation where he is he gets injured once he is playing, and then transfers to BYU. So it's not quite as loaded of a room as it had been in terms of those who are kind of in there fighting for positions. But certainly, like, you look at like 4 guys and say, chances are those are the starters at this point. Michigan likes to have about 7 or 8 guys that can go, whether it's for injury, for having that extra lineman, all of those things. So there's certainly a lot that you can look at there. But we are going to continue on. We're going to move into more of those guys and look a little bit more individually at some of the players that they do have. And then we'll get into the freshmen in segment 3, and we will do that here in just a moment. But before we do, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3. I never felt like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Got just like almost all the way through that without starting to stutter, and then I start to stutter. This is how I roll. Not to sound like Florida Georgia Line. This is how we roll. I don't know where these references are coming from. I'm not even a country fan. That is Florida Georgia Line, right? I had one summer where I listened to country. One. And the funny thing is my neighbors, right, not too long after I moved in 2023, they had their house re-sided, and the contractors were blaring country, and I knew every song that was being played. Like, every single song was popular in that summer, 2014. So it's like, did they just not write any new country music? I don't get it. Not my jam, but it was for a summer, because it's just, like, listen, I'm open-minded. I'm not normally when people ask you that question, like, what do you listen to? I listen to everything. Okay, I don't listen to everything. Like, now I listen to worship music mostly, but like, I'm a metalhead generally. So I will listen to my North Lane when I'm on, when I'm on the treadmill or something. I'll listen to North Lane and Oh Sleeper and Norma Jean and Starset and all kinds of other stuff, right? a little bit of Christian metal, a little bit of, non-Christian metal. Every now and again, I'll throw in some Korn. I went and saw the Led Zeppelin documentary over the weekend. That was incredible. And seeing that in IMAX, I just wish it was like twice as long. It was absolutely incredible. All right, enough of the music thing and my little sidebars here. Okay, we're looking at the offensive line. Like I mentioned, Nathan Efobi is a guy who I'm interested in. Now, he's more of a tackle, but at the same time, I think Evan Link would really thrive at guard. He has the body that looks more like a guard than it does a tackle, right? Like Michigan's kind of had that a little bit lately, where it's like they end up having a guy that plays tackle that looks like he could be a guard. Like Andrew Gentry was one of those. Like, it was kind of surprising to me when it was like, oh, we're going to have him at tackle. Now they cross-train guys, so that's not necessarily that surprising. But I think that Evan Link still is a guy that I would look at and say, yeah, he's probably a guy that could be more of a guard than he could be at a tackle. Like, I feel like that's like where his higher calling is. So I wouldn't be super surprised if, like, through the cross training and all of that, because they're going to look for the best five, right? Like, Lawrence Attar comes in and cannot, beat out Evan Link at guard, and they can figure out that they can go with a Nathan Efobi at tackle or a different guy, right? Like, we'll get to the freshmen, of course, or you look at like something like that, then maybe it's not necessarily going to, be what he thought coming in, right? They're not just going to placate someone, be like, well, we got to play him. It's his final year. They're just not going to do that, right? But outside of that, I mean, you've got other players that you look at and say, maybe those guys could play too. Like entering year 2. Now, that's not necessarily the time frame that you generally want to put a guy out there. But like you look at the guys that are entering their second year, Luke Hamilton, Hambone, as they call him. He got some praise in bowl prep from Giovanni Alhadi, said like he's just been absolutely phenomenal. Can a Ben Roebuck step up? Blake Frazier had been injured, it seems, throughout most of the year because he was in street clothes pretty much all year long, minus like a game or two, it felt like. Can he step up? Because he's got the pedigree in terms of the blood in his veins, as a legacy player. He certainly also looks like a guy who could be a tackle, more so than a guard. So you have a few options as far as that's concerned. And then Connor Jones, who's just kind of just been there languishing away. And you just kind of wonder, like, okay, what could he end up doing something or anything? I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. And that's not even mentioning Brooks Barr, who moved over to that other side too. So they've got a bunch of bodies that you just kind of wonder, like, are some of these guys going to be able to, crack that lineup, right? It seems like every year there's somebody, right? Like Evan Link was that this year. John Judice was as well, where you're just looking at it and you say, oh, I'm kind of surprised. And it seems like that happens a lot for Michigan on the offensive line. 2020, Andrew Vistardis, not a great showing in 2020. 2021, completely different story, right? It just always feels like there's someone that steps up, and you hope that it's more of an Andrew Vistardis 2021 type scenario than it is, and I'm not meaning offense, but Nolan Ulizio 2017, which was just an absolute debacle. And you don't always necessarily, just to like reiterate the argument I had with my cousin, you don't need like the senior laden offensive line in order to work things out, right? You see more younger players able to play more often because things are different now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? Younger players in high school can get more of their strength and conditioning and, all that year-round workout. And it's become like a full-time job for these guys. Whereas before it was like guys would get good at football and they train all year, but it wasn't quite as serious as it is now, right? Especially now that there's financial incentives in college. I think high schoolers have that much more of an incentive to try to get to work and get as good as they possibly can, get as big as they possibly can, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm curious to see where one of those types of guys works out, like a Ben Roebuck or a Connor Jones, who's been around for several years now, Luke Hamilton. And the one name that's been around that I haven't mentioned is, and when I say been around, he's going into year 2. That's Jake Guarnera, who was part of that ballyhooed class of let's make it sound like a law firm: Guarnera, Frazier, Sprague, Hamilton, and Roebuck. That. It's funny because we kind of write some of these guys off like Roebuck and Hamilton, even though at the time of like their commitments and everything, you looked at it and said, like, man, this might be one of the best Michigan offensive line classes in some time. And then we just start to write guys off like right away. That's just kind of how this works, particularly on the offensive line, because generally you don't hear from them until their junior years. But I think that there is a chance that they can compete and get in on it because now they've seen what it takes at the college level. They've been through a year and a half by the time the season comes around of strength and conditioning and all of that kind of stuff. And they've gone through practice. They now kind of understand what's asked of them. And now that you bring in Juan Castillo as an analyst and he can actually coach on field, right? Meaning like he can actually get in there and practice and actually direct them. That helps Grant Newsome in his job a lot. Helps propel things up and propel things forward that much more. But if I was to choose right this second, what is it going to look like? I mean, to me, I would say you're probably going to see some version of what you saw in the ReliaQuest Bowl without Preeb. So then you're just kind of questioning, can it be either Luke Hamilton, I guess would be the answer on one end, or could it be Lawrence Attar, who comes in from Ferris State and was like an all whatever that conference is type of player. But it's a big jump in terms of competition, because you're playing Ohio State, you're playing Oklahoma, you're not playing teams that, like, let's just be frank, a lot of us have not heard of. So it's just a different thing. But there's something that can change everything in terms of what you would expect. And that is the freshman, because Michigan did bring in technically 1 5-star, what would have been 2 if we didn't just have the late rankings changes. And there's just freshmen that could be ready to go sooner than you'd think. So let's talk about the 4. Is it 4? Let me just count real quick. I think it's 4 offensive linemen. Yes, 4 linemen. The haul that Michigan had this last class. Let's talk about it here in just a moment. Still seem to have the disease where I'm speaking not necessarily fast, but like getting through my material way too fast. And I apologize, because I'd love for this to be a 30-minute. Like, listen, maybe you like it as 21, 22, 24. I mean, it's probably going to be like a 24-minute episode. Let's just be honest. But I know, like, when I'm taking Zuri for a walk, I'm looking for the longest things, right? So I took Zuri for a walk today, decided to listen to some Philip Anthony Mitchell, 2819 Church down in Atlanta. And like, I picked like, okay, his sermons are X amount long. Our walk is 70 minutes. I'll pick the longest sermon which is 58 minutes. Like, let's go as long as we can, right? Just so I don't have to go and look for something else. I still had to do that, but nonetheless. All right, Michigan brought in 4 freshmen this class, and we know that 3 of them are already on campus. 1 is not, and certainly there. If you are looking at possibilities, things that could change things up, you're looking no further than Andrew Babalola, number 14 overall, regardless of position in the rankings, 5-star. Not a lot of football under his belt, but has the type of talent where you could look at and say, yeah, he might play in year 1. That might be the situation where you say, like, okay, maybe you want to put him at right tackle and then put Sprague at left, then you move Link inside. Maybe that's how it works. I'm not sure. But I would like to see more, like, he still looks really skinny, like in his uniform, right? Like, we got to see him in bowl prep, and he still looks a little skinny in his uniform, but he certainly has the ability, and with some coaching, winter conditioning, spring ball, and summer conditioning, maybe he'll be ready. But he has all the tools. He feels like the type of guy that is going to play no later than his second year, but like, you might make the decision to go for him in year 1, right? Colorado had that, name escapes me, had that great offensive lineman who was starting in year 1, right? And that's kind of who recruits. When I talk to different guys, they would often mention him. Name escapes me at the moment. But nonetheless, like, that's just kind of where we're at. And he certainly could be that guy. Now, could Ty Haywood, the former Alabama commit, the former 5-star, still a 5-star in our hearts, still a 5-star on ESPN, I think it is. Might have been Rivals, one of those two, but not on 3 and not on 24/7. Could Ty Haywood be that guy? That's also a possibility. I know Sharon Moore absolutely loves his game. He was the kind of top guy on the board. No one really heard about that. I kind of got word in November when it was the talk. Like, again, I got a phone call before Bryce Underwood committed saying, keep a lookout. It's going to be you're going to see a bunch of guys flip. It's going to be Bryce, Elijah Dotson, Derek Meadows, and Ty Haywood, and Justice Haynes is coming as well. It was all on one phone call, like the Sunday before before Bryce committed. So that's what's happening. Now, Meadows didn't end up in the fold, but when I went having some of the phone calls surrounding that, it came to my attention that like the first chance that Sherrone Moore could hit the road and see somebody back in like the beginning of the 2025 cycle, he went and saw Ty Haywood. Like he absolutely adores him, and I understand that's an NIL play, but like that doesn't mean anything in terms of that. I mean, actually, if anything, the fact that it was an NIL play and Michigan made that play shows you just how much Michigan thinks he could be really, really, really good, right? Because they're not if they're not going to do that for a developmental prospect, right? Like you're not going to just kind of go all out in the way that they did. So, could one or both of them crack? It's certainly possible because, again, those are the types of guys that have that type of talent that can absolutely change the game and really change just what you were expecting. Then you've got two other guys that are early enrollees that were signees in this last class. Let's talk about Avery Gash first, who I've just watched him transform his body over the course of the last year. From the point when he committed, he was just like a skinny lineman. And then by the time that the Northwestern game came around and I saw him, coming through the tunnel as a visitor, because he was at like every game, right? He was unrecognizable. I just had a moment where I was just sitting there looking at him and be like, he looks like a college player now. He didn't look like that a year ago or even at the beginning of the year. But now it's like, yeah, he looks like a college player. He's got that bulk. He looked perfectly at home in that uniform in the bull prep practices that I saw. So that's good news. 4-star guy, local. Just the type of guy that you would think is going to end up leaving. I don't like, maybe I'm just calling my shot. And I mean, I've seen some of his play. He's an interior guy. I don't think he'll play this year, but again, you can't write anything off because they need to fill opposition at least. And certainly you could see guys usurp others. I look at him and think like he might end his career in the same way that we would look at like a Ben Bredesen. So that's me calling my shot there. So we'll see if that happens. That's not like my Hassan Haskins is the most talented running back in the room thing from 2018 for you old timers that have been listening since back then that understood that I was getting certain intel. I don't have intel there. I'm just saying like that wouldn't surprise me just kind of based off of what I have seen, what I know of Avery, his body type, his position. We'll see if that leadership also comes into play the same way. But I just feel like he would be that type of guy that's we're going to look back and say, like, he ended up being the glue. Like, we loved those 5 stars, but Avery Gash ended up being the glue. And then you've got Caden Strayhorn just to finish us out. Michigan State legacy, center, IMG Academy. I do think that there's a bit of development that has to be at play there. So I would be kind of surprised if he is playing anytime before his junior year. I kind of heard some mixed things out of like people who know football better than I do about kind of where he stood, right? Like I believe when Michigan started recruiting him, he was a 4-star and he kind of dropped into that no man's land 3-star. And there's reasons for that I have been told by just, again, people that know football better than I do. And so I think it's just one of those things we'll see. Now it's always good to get one over your rival, especially when you get the son of Michigan State's literal not play-by-play color, but color analyst on the radio, right? That's just like a shot over the bow in so many ways. And it's kind of funny. You get him, you get Chase Herbstreit, like they're just trolling almost. But I think that they do obviously really like him. He was one of their guys that they really went hard after. Whereas Michigan State, as Caden Strayhorn told me, got scared the moment that Michigan really started to be a player and Jonathan Smith came in and they didn't even really try to recruit him. So you hope that pays out. But I think it'll take a couple years before that happens. All right, I think that's touching them all. Like I said, 24-ish minutes. There we go. A little bit of vamping. That was probably unnecessary, but that's what this show's all about. Anyway, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back on Tuesday. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you then. Peace.